I still remember the exact moment my world crumbled beneath my feet. Standing in our kitchen, holding a wine glass that threatened to slip from my trembling fingers, I watched as my husband of 8 years introduced his new colleague, Vanessa, to my entire family at our anniversary celebration. The way his hand lingered on her lower back, the knowing glances they exchanged, suddenly all the late nights at the office made perfect sense. What they didn't know was that I had already discovered his second phone last week, with messages that would make even the most liberal person blush. I had prepared something special for the dinner's conclusion. Not the anniversary surprise David was expecting, but evidence that would expose their affair to everyone present. Sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served in front of the people whose opinion matters most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs as I pulled into the driveway of our suburban home, returning early from a business trip that was supposed to last until the weekend. Fallen leaves crunched beneath my boots as I wheeled my suitcase toward the front door, excited to surprise David with my early return. Our 8th anniversary was just days away, and I wanted extra time to prepare the perfect celebration. We'd met during graduate school, me studying literature, him pursuing his MBA. David's ambition had always been something I admired, even when it meant longer hours at his marketing firm as he climbed the corporate ladder. The promotion to senior director last spring had pushed our relationship to its limits, with him frequently missing dinners and family gatherings, his mind perpetually occupied with work concerns even when physically present. Communication and compromise, my mother had repeated like a mantra throughout my childhood. I'd taken those words to heart during our marriage, understanding his dedication to his career while maintaining my own identity as a successful editor at Patterson Publishing. We had built what I thought was an enviable life, the charming 4-bedroom colonial in Oakwood Heights, vacations to destinations our friends envied on social media, and a relationship I believed was built on mutual respect and honesty. As I inserted my key into the front door, I noticed David's car wasn't in the garage. Typical for a Wednesday afternoon, he wouldn't be home until after 7. I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of our home welcoming me back. But something felt different. A faint trace of unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air, something floral and expensive that I certainly didn't wear. My preferred scent was always subtle and woodsy, a choice David had claimed to love. I dismissed the thought initially. Perhaps the cleaning service had changed products, or maybe David's assistant had dropped off some paperwork. Setting my suitcase by the stairs, I moved through the house, eager to shower away the staleness of airplane air and highway travel. Our bedroom appeared exactly as I'd left it 5 days ago, except for one detail that caught my eye. The decorative pillows on our bed were arranged differently. It was a small thing, so minute that most people wouldn't notice, but I had a specific way of arranging them, and David never bothered to replicate my system when he made the bed. Someone had attempted to recreate my pattern but had placed the burgundy accent pillow in the wrong position. Opening the closet to hang up my coat, I noticed several of David's shirts were missing, specifically the ones I'd just had dry cleaned before my trip. Again, nothing definitively suspicious, but enough to raise a slight feeling of unease. I moved to the bathroom, where the feeling intensified. 2 wet towels hung on the rack, though David always used just one. And there it was again. That unfamiliar perfume, stronger this time. I stood frozen, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My mind raced with possibilities, most of them innocent. Perhaps David had allowed a colleague to freshen up here before an important meeting. Maybe his sister had stopped by and borrowed the shower when her water heater broke again. After my shower, wrapped in my favorite robe, I headed downstairs to make some tea. That's when I noticed David's laptop on the kitchen island. Unusual, as he typically took it to work. The screen was dark, but a notification banner appeared when I inadvertently brushed against the touchpad. A calendar alert. Dinner with V, 8 p.m., Riverview. Riverview was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, the kind of place reserved for special occasions. We had celebrated our engagement there years ago, a business dinner, surely. But why hadn't he mentioned it before my trip? And who was V? I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach as I prepared my tea. I wasn't the type to snoop. We had always respected each other's privacy. But as I sipped the warm liquid, the combination of small discrepancies kept tugging at my thoughts. The perfume, the pillows, the wet towels, the mysterious dinner. I placed my mug on the counter and took a deep breath. This was ridiculous. I was creating a narrative from innocent coincidences. David and I had been together for 10 years, married for 8. We had built a life together, supported each other's dreams, planned for our future. One business dinner and some misplaced pillows didn't erase that history. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. The same message I'd received countless times over the past year. I replied with my usual, miss you, love you. Then I added, surprise, I'm home early. My meeting's finished ahead of schedule. His response didn't come immediately, which was unusual. David was typically quick to reply, regardless of how busy he was. 20 minutes later, my phone finally chimed. Great, tied up with client emergency. Probably won't be home until very late. Don't wait up. Love you too. I stared at the message. Its casual dismissal of my early return sending a chill through me. No excitement. No suggestion to meet for a late dinner. Just the same instruction not to wait up. That evening, I tried to focus on a manuscript I'd brought home, but couldn't. Concentrate. Around midnight, I heard David's key in the lock. I pretended to be asleep when he entered the bedroom, listening as he showered and slid quietly into bed, keeping to his side as if afraid to wake me. The scent that followed him wasn't just his cologne. That floral perfume clung faintly to him, even after his shower. The next morning, I woke to find David already dressed for work, earlier than usual. You didn't tell me you were coming home yesterday, he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. I texted you, I replied, studying his reflection. Right, of course. Sorry, it was such a crazy day. He turned and smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. How was your trip? Productive. The Seattle office is finally getting organized. I sat up, pulling the covers around me. How was your dinner at Riverview? His hands froze momentarily on his tie. How did you know about that? Saw the calendar alert on your laptop? Important client? David's smile returned, more relaxed. This time. Very. Victoria Chen from Apex Industries. They're considering a major campaign with us. Could be the biggest account of the year. Victoria. V. The explanation was perfectly reasonable, and yet something in his delivery felt rehearsed. That's wonderful, I said, matching his casual tone. Maybe we could celebrate at Riverview for our anniversary this weekend. It's been ages since we've been there together. About that, David ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. I might need to rain-check our celebration. This Apex situation is all hands on deck. Maybe next weekend? Our anniversary had never been postponed before. Not once in 8 years. Even during the most demanding periods of his career, David had always made time for that special day. It's our 8th anniversary, David. I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you, I promise. This account could mean a promotion to executive director by next quarter. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. You understand, right? You've always been so supportive. Before I could respond, he grabbed his briefcase. Late for a meeting. We'll talk tonight. After he left, I sat in the quiet house, replaying our conversation. Each word, each gesture now scrutinized through a lens of suspicion I'd never applied to our marriage before. It felt foreign, this doubt, ugly and unwelcome. I reached for my phone and called Catherine, my best friend since college. "He's working. Late again?" she asked, after I recounted the events of the past 24 hours. "On your anniversary weekend?" "It's an important client," I explained, suddenly feeling defensive of David despite my own suspicions. "Emma," Catherine's voice softened, "how many important clients have there been in the past year?" The question hung in the air between us, too many to count, each one demanding late nights, weekend work, last-minute cancellations. "You think—" "I'm being paranoid," I said finally. "I think you're noticing patterns," she replied carefully, "and I think you deserve answers." After hanging up, I moved through the house aimlessly, my mind racing. In our home office, I sat at the desk we shared, opening my laptop to distract myself with work. David's charging cable was still plugged into the outlet, unusual as he always took it to work. Next to it was a small black case I didn't recognize. I opened it, finding a sleek smartphone inside, not David's usual device. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was newer, with no personal touches or wear. Curiosity overrode my respect for privacy as I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, requesting a passcode. On impulse, I tried our anniversary date, the celebration he was now too busy to honor. The phone unlocked immediately. My hands trembled as I navigated through the device. The call history showed dozens of calls to and from V as recently as last night. The text messages revealed conversations between David and someone named Vanessa. Intimate exchanges, explicit photos, plans to meet. One message from yesterday caught my eye. "Can't wait for you to finally meet my family this weekend. Remember the story. You're my new colleague from the digital marketing department." I felt as if I'd been plunged into ice water. This weekend, our anniversary. The family dinner I'd planned as a surprise, inviting our parents and siblings to celebrate with us. The dinner David had tried to rain-check just minutes ago. More messages revealed their relationship had been going on for nearly 7 months. 7 months of lies, of working late, of business trips that weren't entirely for business. Photos showed them together in places I recognized, including our vacation home in Lake Geneva, where David had supposedly gone alone to decompress after a stressful project last month. The betrayal was so complete, so methodical, that I could barely breathe. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a one-time mistake. This was a calculated double life, maintained with precision while I remained oblivious, believing in our partnership, our future. I returned the phone exactly as I'd found it, then called my sister Rachel. She arrived an hour later, holding me as I finally allowed myself to break down. "What are you going to do?" she asked when my tears subsided. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not canceling our anniversary dinner." The next 2 days passed in a blur of painful clarity. Every late night, every canceled plan, every distracted conversation now viewed through the lens of what I knew. David continued his routine, unaware that I had discovered his secret. I maintained the facade of normalcy, confirming with caterers and family members that our anniversary celebration was still happening on Saturday night. Despite David's belief that it had been postponed, I considered confronting him immediately, demanding explanations, dissolving into accusatory tears. But something held me back, a desire to understand the full scope of his deception before showing my hand. Catherine worried about my emotional state, suggesting I consult with a lawyer before making any decisions. Rachel offered her guest room if I needed space, but I had a different plan forming, one that would force the truth into the open on my terms, not his. By Friday evening, I had made my necessary preparations. I met with James Norton, a family law attorney recommended by a colleague, bringing copies of financial statements, property documents, and selected screenshots from the secret phone. He outlined my options with compassion and clarity. "Given what you've shared, Emma, you're in a stronger position than many clients I see," James explained. "The documentation of infidelity, the evidence of him using marital assets to finance this relationship, these strengthen your case considerably." I nodded, absorbing his words without emotion. The pragmatic details of dissolving an 8-year marriage felt surreal, like I was discussing someone else's life. "What about tomorrow?" I asked finally. "The dinner he thinks isn't happening?" James leaned back in his chair. "Legally speaking, a public confrontation doesn't strengthen or weaken your case. This is about what you need for your own closure." What I needed. The concept seemed foreign after years of balancing my needs with David's, compromising for our collective good. What did I need now that our collective was revealed as fiction? "I need the truth acknowledged," I said finally. "Not just between us, but in front of the people who matter to us. No more lies, no more pretending." Saturday arrived, bright and crisp, the perfect autumn day for a celebration. David left early for what he claimed was an emergency client meeting, promising to be home by dinner time so we could at least have a quiet celebration, just the two of us. I spent the day overseeing final preparations, directing caterers, arranging flowers, transforming our home into the anniversary venue he didn't know was still happening. At 4 o'clock, I began getting ready, choosing a burgundy dress I'd purchased months ago for this occasion. As I applied my makeup with steady hands, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror, composed, determined, clear-eyed despite the devastation she carried. At 5:30, the first guests arrived, my parents, followed by David's sister and her husband. By 6, our home filled with the people closest to us, all believing they were there for a joyful celebration. David's parents asked his whereabouts, and I explained he was running late from a work commitment, but would arrive soon. "Always working, that boy," his father said proudly. "That's how he's gotten so far." If only you knew how he's been spending his time, I thought, maintaining my smile. At 6:45, David texted that he was wrapping up and would be home in 30 minutes. At 6:50, I received another message from the secret phone I'd been monitoring. "Coming with David to family dinner. Nervous but excited to meet everyone. Your husband speaks so highly of all of you." The message, clearly meant for someone else, confirmed what I'd suspected. He was bringing her to our home, to our anniversary, to meet our families. The audacity was breathtaking. At 7:20, headlights swept across the front windows as David's car pulled into the driveway. I moved to the entryway, instructing our guests to prepare for the surprise I'd planned. They gathered expectantly, champagne glasses in hand, ready to shower us with congratulations. The front door opened, and David stepped inside, briefcase in hand. Behind him was a tall woman with chestnut hair and a nervous smile, carrying a bottle of wine. They both froze at the sight of the crowd, confusion crossing David's face before comprehension dawned in his eyes. "Surprise," I said, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. "Happy anniversary, David." The blood drained from his face as he looked from me to our assembled families, then back to the woman behind him, who stood uncertainly in the doorway. "Emma, I thought we rescheduled," he said, his normally confident voice strained. "I decided our anniversary was worth celebrating on the actual day," I replied, stepping forward. "Won't you introduce your friend to everyone?" Panic flashed across his features, replaced quickly by the smooth composure I'd seen him deploy in countless professional and social situations. This was David the negotiator, David the problem solver, David the convincing liar. "Of course," he said, gesturing to the woman. "Everyone, This is Vanessa Moore, my new colleague from the digital marketing department. We were just wrapping up some work on the Apex account. Vanessa stepped forward with a practiced smile, though her eyes betrayed her discomfort. It's lovely to meet you all. David talks about his family constantly. Does he? I asked, reaching for the glass of wine I'd left on the entry table. How interesting. Because David hasn't mentioned you once. An uncomfortable silence fell over the gathering. David's sister exchanged glances with my brother, while our parents shifted awkwardly, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Vanessa just joined the team last month, David explained smoothly. We've been swamped with the Apex project. 7 months, I corrected, taking a deliberate sip of wine. I'm sorry? David's confident facade cracked slightly. Vanessa has been on your team for 7 months now, I clarified. Since February 12th, to be precise. That was your first dinner together at La Maison, wasn't it? You expensed it to the company as a business dinner, but the receipt shows 2 steaks and a $175 bottle of champagne. Murmurs rippled through our guests. David stepped toward me, lowering his voice. Emma, you're embarrassing yourself. Let's discuss this privately. Like we discussed your trip to Lake Geneva? I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. The one where you were supposedly alone but actually took Vanessa to our vacation home? Vanessa's composed expression faltered. David, what's happening? Yes, David, his mother interjected, her voice tight with confusion. What is happening? I placed my wine glass down, reaching instead for my phone. Since you've been so busy with work, I thought I'd help explain. I turned to our stunned audience. David has been having an affair with Vanessa for 7 months. They've been planning to introduce her as his colleague tonight, not realizing I've known about their relationship for days. David lunged toward me. Emma, stop this right now. I have the evidence, David, I said calmly, holding up my phone. Every message, every photo, every hotel receipt. Would you like me to share them with our families, or would you prefer to tell the truth yourself? The room fell completely silent. Vanessa stepped away from David, her face flushing with embarrassment or anger, perhaps both. David's father placed a protective arm around his wife, whose eyes had filled with tears. My parents moved closer to me, my father's expression darkening as he glared at the son-in-law he had once welcomed into the family. David looked around at the circle of shocked faces, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling before him. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed utterly without words, without charm, without a strategy to navigate the situation he'd created. I think, my mother said finally, breaking the excruciating silence, that everyone except Emma should leave. No one moved at first, the tension in the room suffocating as all eyes remained fixed on David and Vanessa. My sister Rachel was the first to break the paralysis, moving to my side and slipping her arm through mine in a gesture of solidarity that nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. The tremble in her hand matched my internal quaking, though, outwardly, I remained eerily calm. I'm not going anywhere, Rachel whispered fiercely. Not unless you want me to. David's father, Charles, a man whose approval David had sought relentlessly throughout our marriage, stepped forward. His normally jovial face had hardened into something I barely recognized, his disappointment carved into deep lines around his mouth. David Alexander Mitchell, he said, using the full name that had only emerged during moments of serious transgression in childhood, according to family stories. What have you done? David's eyes darted around the room like those of a cornered animal. I had never seen him so utterly devoid of confidence, so stripped of the charismatic assurance that had carried him through board meetings and social gatherings alike. This vulnerability should have satisfied some part of me, yet it only deepened the hollow ache in my chest. The man I loved had never truly existed. Dad, this isn't. Emma is exaggerating the situation, David stammered. attempting to regain control. Vanessa and I have been working closely together, yes, but— Don't, I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady. Don't compound this with more lies. Not here. Not now. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching her purse strap. The expensive watch on her wrist, identical to the one I'd found in an unmarked jewelry box while looking for gift wrap last month, which had mysteriously disappeared before I could ask about it, caught the light as she moved. I think I should— Go, she said quietly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. No, I said, surprising myself and everyone else. Stay, Vanessa. You're as much a part of this story as any of us. Perhaps more than me, considering how much time you've actually spent with my husband this year. A flush crept up her neck. I didn't know he was still— she began, then stopped herself. Still what? David's mother, Patricia, asked, her voice barely audible. Still married? The implication hung in the air, expanding to fill every corner of the room. It wasn't just an affair. It was a complete double life, with promises and future plans that extended far beyond mere physical indiscretion. My father, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. Emma, sweetheart, do you want us to stay or go? This is your home, and these are your terms now. His words, your home, your terms, granted me a permission I hadn't realized. I needed. Throughout our marriage, I had unconsciously allowed David to set the terms, to establish the boundaries and rhythms of our life together. Even in my discovery of his betrayal, I had plotted my response with consideration for propriety, for minimizing embarrassment, for containing the damage. But standing in our living room, surrounded by the people who had witnessed our vows 8 years ago, I suddenly understood that I no longer needed to consider his dignity or comfort. I'd like everyone to stay, I decided, meeting David's panicked gaze directly. We've spent enough time with secrets and private conversations. Let's have the truth. All of it, here and now. Patricia let out a small sound that might have been agreement or distress. Charles guided her to the sofa, where she sank down, looking suddenly frail. My mother moved to sit beside her, an instinctive act of female solidarity that transcended family lines. David's sister Melissa hovered nearby, her expression fluctuating between shock and something that looked unsettlingly like prior knowledge. Melissa, I said, following a sudden intuition. Did you know? All eyes turned to her. David made a slight movement, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. A warning glance, a subtle shake of his head. I suspected, she admitted, not meeting my eyes. There were inconsistencies in things he told me versus what he told you. But I never knew for certain, Emma, I swear. But you never thought to warn me? The hurt in my voice was evident, despite my attempts at control. Melissa had been my friend before she was my sister-in-law. We had gone shopping together, shared confidences over wine, celebrated each other's birthdays and milestones. I told him to end it or come clean, she said miserably. Last month, when he asked to use my address for some packages, I told him he was making a terrible mistake. Packages? I echoed. That's enough, David interjected sharply. This is between Emma and me. The rest of you need to leave. Now. Charles rose to his full height, surprisingly imposing for a man in his 70s. You don't give the orders here, son. Not anymore. The caterers chose that moment to appear from the kitchen, bearing trays of the anniversary dinner I had planned so meticulously. They froze, sensing the atmosphere, their professional smiles faltering. Should we serve now, Mrs. Mitchell? The head caterer asked uncertainly. A hysterical laugh threatened to escape me. Mrs. Mitchell. The name felt like a costume I had outgrown, a role in a play that had abruptly changed scripts without informing me. Yes, I said, making an impulsive decision. Everyone, please take your seats. Since we're all here, we might as well enjoy the meal I planned for our anniversary celebration. Emma, this is ridiculous, David protested, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I had once found endearing, but now registered as a calculated move to appear sympathetically disheveled. Is it? I challenged. More ridiculous than bringing your girlfriend to our anniversary dinner? More ridiculous than using our vacation home for romantic getaways? More ridiculous than charging lingerie for her on our joint credit card? Each question landed like a physical blow, causing him to flinch visibly. Vanessa's head snapped up at the last accusation. You said that was a company expense account, she hissed at David. Oh, so there are things he's lied to you about too? I asked, a bitter smile forming. How unexpected. The caterers had retreated to the kitchen, clearly deciding that immediate service was not advisable. The families remained frozen in a tableau of discomfort, no one quite certain how to proceed. My brother-in-law Michael, Rachel's husband, and, usually the peacemaker in family conflicts, stepped forward. Maybe we should give Emma and David some privacy to discuss this, he suggested gently. No, I said again, more firmly this time. I've had enough privacy and secrets to last a lifetime. We're going to sit down, like the family we've pretended to be, and have this conversation openly. I moved toward the dining room, where the table was set with our best china and crystal, autumn-colored flowers arranged in the centerpiece I had selected the day before, when I still had some small, irrational hope that there might be an explanation. That would undo my discovery. Please, I said, gesturing to the chairs. Sit. Remarkably, they complied. My parents, David's parents, our siblings and their spouses, all moving woodenly to take their assigned seats. Only David and Vanessa remained standing. This is insane, David muttered, but I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was recalibrating, adjusting his strategy, looking for the approach that would cause the least damage to his reputation and standing. You too, David, I said, pointing to his usual place at the opposite end of the table. And Vanessa, you can take the empty seat beside him. The one that would have been for our child, if we'd been blessed with one during these 8 years of supposed commitment. The deliberate cruelty of my words was not lost on anyone, least of all David, who had always pushed back against starting a family, citing career timing and financial readiness. Now I wondered if his hesitation had been motivated by the knowledge that his commitment to our marriage had an expiration date. Vanessa looked to David for guidance. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. He nodded almost imperceptibly, and they moved to take their seats. David at the head of the table opposite me, Vanessa beside him, looking like she wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. I signaled to the caterers, who began serving. The first course, a butternut squash soup that had been David's favorite since our third date at a small French bistro near our graduate school campus. The memory of that evening, his animated description of his career ambitions, my charmed laughter, the feeling of falling helplessly in love, hit me with unexpected force. I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the bizarre dinner party unfolding before me. Well, I said, lifting my soup spoon with deliberate calm. Since we're all here to celebrate 8 years of marriage, perhaps David would like to share what those years have meant to him. The silence that followed was excruciating. David stared at his soup, untouched before him, as if it contained answers to questions he'd never considered. Emma, my mother began cautiously, perhaps this isn't the best. I want to hear what he has to say, I interrupted, my eyes never leaving David's face. After all, he's had plenty to say to Vanessa about our marriage, about me, about our life together. David's head snapped up, a flicker of alarm in his eyes. Yes, I read those messages too, I confirmed, answering his unspoken question. The ones where you described me as controlling and career-obsessed, where you complained about my emotional neediness whenever I asked why you were distant, where you told her I was holding you back from the life you really wanted. Each quoted phrase seemed to land physically on the table between us, visible and tangible in their cruelty. My mother made a small sound of distress. My father's hand tightened around his water glass. "You weren't supposed to see those," David said finally, his voice hollow. A bark of laughter escaped me. Clearly? Just like I wasn't supposed to see the receipts for the weekend in Napa Valley last spring? Or the photos of you two on the boat my father helped us buy? The boat that was supposedly in storage when I asked to use it in July? My father's expression darkened further at this revelation. The boat had been a generous wedding gift, one that represented significant financial sacrifice on his part. "You used Richard's boat for your affair?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. David had the grace to look ashamed, but remained silent. "He used everything for his affair," I answered for him. "Our resources, our home, our friends, everyone and everything in our life became props and accessories for his alternate reality." The caterers returned to clear the soup course, working with silent efficiency that seemed almost comical against the backdrop of our family drama. No one had eaten more than a few obligatory spoonfuls. As the main course was served, roast duck with cherry glaze, another of David's favorites, Vanessa finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know it was your anniversary." All eyes turned to her, this stranger who had become central to our family crisis without speaking more than a few sentences. "Excuse me?" I asked, not certain I had heard correctly. She cleared her throat, sitting straighter. "I didn't know today was your anniversary. David told me you were separated, living together only for appearances while you finalized divorce. Terms privately." The revelation struck me with physical force, as if she had reached across the table and slapped me. I had prepared myself for the usual affair justifications, a loveless marriage, unmet needs, momentary weakness, but not for the complete fabrication of our relationship's demise. "Separated?" I repeated, the word foreign on my tongue. "Divorce." "Terms?" David closed his eyes briefly, his carefully constructed narrative collapsing around him. "When did this separation supposedly begin?" I asked, addressing Vanessa directly now, treating her not as an adversary, but as another woman who had been deceived. "Last Christmas," she replied, glancing uncertainly at David. "He said you both agreed to give it one more year for appearances, but that you'd been effectively living separate lives since then." Last Christmas. The holiday we had spent with my family in Vermont, skating on the frozen lake, exchanging thoughtful gifts, making love in the creaky guest bedroom of my parents' house while trying to stay quiet. The vacation during which David had proposed, a renewal of our vows for our 10th anniversary, suggesting we begin planning for the milestone celebration. "Interesting timeline," I said, my voice distant and hollow to my own ears. "Considering he gave me this for Christmas." I held up my right hand, where a sapphire ring, my birthstone, caught the light. It had been an unexpected gift, more extravagant than our usual exchanges, which David had presented with a heartfelt card about looking forward to decades more of building our life together. And in February, just weeks after this supposed separation agreement, he planned a surprise weekend for my birthday. He arranged for my friends to join us at a winery tour, where he toasted to many more birthdays together. Vanessa's face had gone pale, her eyes wide as she turned to look at David, who was staring resolutely at his untouched plate. "You said you were at a company retreat that weekend," she said, her voice hardening. "You said you couldn't respond to messages because you were in team-building exercises all day." "He was building something, certainly," I commented, a bitter edge to my voice. Just not the team he claimed to be working with. The realization was dawning on Vanessa's face. She hadn't been the exception to David's pattern of deception. She was simply its newest target, Whatever he had told her about me, about our marriage, about his intentions, was likely as carefully constructed as the stories he had told me about his late nights and business trips. "I think," Charles said heavily, breaking his lengthy silence, "that my son has been leading a double life for quite some time, and doing it remarkably well until today." The absence of pride in his voice was notable. Charles had always admired David's professional accomplishments, his strategic mind, his ability to navigate complex social and business situations. Now those same talents had been revealed as tools for manipulation and betrayal. "How many others have there been, David?" Patricia asked suddenly, her quiet voice cutting through the tension. "Before Vanessa. How many?" It was the question I hadn't allowed myself to ask, perhaps because I feared the answer would demolish even the good memories I still cherished from earlier in our marriage. David's eyes met mine for the first time since he had entered the house, and I saw in them a flicker of the man I thought I had married, regretful, conflicted, capable of honesty. "There were 2 brief involvements," he admitted. "Before Vanessa, nothing serious." "Nothing serious," I echoed, the words tasting like ash. "Like the nothing serious weekend with Claudia from accounting 3 years ago? The one you said was a professional conference in Chicago?" David's surprise was evident. "How did you know about Claudia?" "I didn't, until this week. But once I started looking, the evidence was everywhere. Hotel charges that didn't match your supposed location, text messages to Mike that were clearly not being sent to your college friend, receipts for dinners on nights you claimed to be eating at your desk." The depth of my investigation seemed to unsettle him. He had underestimated me, assumed that my trust in him was rooted in naivety rather than choice, that my respect for his privacy was based on lack of curiosity rather than principle. "The sad thing is," I continued, "I wasn't looking for evidence of affairs when I found your second phone. I was looking for anniversary cards from previous years. I wanted to create a scrapbook as part of your gift, a timeline of our marriage. Through the notes and cards we'd exchanged, the irony was almost unbearable. Instead, I created a timeline of your deceptions." Rachel made a soft sound of sympathy beside me. David had the decency to look genuinely stricken by this detail. "Emma, I never meant to get caught," I finished for him. "Clearly, you managed the logistics impressively well for someone who consistently forgot to pick up dry cleaning and schedule dental appointments." The caterers appeared again, as if on some cosmic cue, to clear the mostly untouched main course. No one protested when they didn't immediately return with dessert. The ceremonial aspect of the meal had served its purpose, keeping us anchored in place for a conversation that might otherwise have dissolved into chaotic departures and private confrontations. "What happens now?" my father asked, addressing me rather than David. His question encompassed far more than the remainder of the awkward dinner. I had asked myself the same question repeatedly over the past 2 days, mapping out scenarios and contingencies with the same methodical attention to detail that had made me successful in my editorial career. The path forward had seemed clear. When I was alone, reviewing evidence and consulting with James Norton about legal options. But sitting across from David, surrounded by our families, the reality of dismantling a life built over 10 years felt overwhelming. "Now," I said, finding my resolve again, "David and I will begin divorce proceedings. The terms will reflect the circumstances of our separation." David straightened, his businessman persona reasserting itself. "We should discuss this privately. Emma, there are financial considerations, property divisions, all of which will be handled through my attorney," I interjected smoothly. "James Norton. Perhaps you've heard of him. He specializes in high-asset divorces involving infidelity and financial deception." The color drained from David's face. James Norton's reputation in legal circles was formidable. His track record, of securing favorable settlements for wronged spouses well established. "You've already retained counsel," he said, a statement rather than a question. "Yesterday," I confirmed, after reviewing our prenuptial agreement, which, as you'll recall, includes a fidelity clause with significant financial penalties. This detail was news to our families, whose expressions ranged from surprise to grim satisfaction. David and I had signed the agreement at his insistence, primarily to protect his expected inheritances and business interests. The fidelity clause had been my only addition, one he had accepted without hesitation, perhaps because he never expected to be held accountable to it. "That prenup was signed 8 years ago," David countered, his mind visibly calculating angles and defenses. "It may not hold up given our current financial entanglement." "That will be for the courts to decide," I replied evenly, "along with the evidence of your misuse of joint assets to finance your extramarital relationships." Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need to leave," she announced, her voice shaking. I can't be here for this." No one moved to stop her as she gathered her purse and jacket. At the dining room threshold, she paused, turning back to face me directly. "I'm sorry," she said, and despite everything, I believed her. "He told me you knew about us, that you were staying together just for appearances." "I wouldn't have. If I'd known the truth, I wouldn't have continued seeing him." I nodded, acknowledging her apology without accepting or rejecting it. In that moment, I recognized that Vanessa was both complicit in and victim to David's elaborate deceptions. Whatever genuine connection they might have shared was built on a foundation of lies, not unlike my marriage. After she left, the silence in the dining room grew heavier, more oppressive. David stared at the doorway through which Vanessa had disappeared, his expression unreadable. "Well," Patricia said finally, her voice stronger than it had been all evening, "I believe that's enough celebration for one anniversary." She stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. Charles joined her, placing a supportive arm around her shoulders. "Emma," Patricia said, looking at me with eyes so similar to her son's that it physically hurt to meet them, "I am so deeply sorry, not just for tonight, but for everything that's led to this moment. You deserved better from the man we raised." Her words penetrated the strange detachment that had sustained me throughout the evening. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, I felt tears threatening to spill over. Patricia had always been kind to me, welcoming me into their family with genuine warmth. In those early years, she had shared family recipes, included me and holiday traditions, and treated me with the affection she might have shown a daughter of her own. Now, her disappointment in her son was etched across her face, aging her beyond her years. "Thank you, Patricia," I managed, my voice softer than it had been all evening. "You and Charles have nothing to apologize for." Charles shook his head firmly. "We raised him. We're responsible for the man he became." "No," I disagreed, finding unexpected compassion for these two people caught in the shrapnel of their son's choices. "David is a grown man who made his own decisions. You raised him with values he chose to abandon." David made a sound of protest, but a sharp look from his father silenced him. "We should go," Charles said, though he seemed reluctant to leave me alone with the aftermath of the evening's revelations. "Unless you need us to stay, Emma?" The question touched me deeply, that even now, facing their son's disgrace, their concern extended to my well-being. In that moment, I realized one of the many losses this divorce would entail. These people who had become my family would no longer be connected to me by law or custom. The thought sent a fresh wave of grief through me. "I'll be fine," I assured them, though nothing felt further from the truth. "Rachel and my parents are here." Patricia approached me slowly, as if afraid I might shatter at her touch. When she embraced me, the scent of her familiar perfume, the same she had worn at our wedding, triggered a cascade of memories. Her helping me with my veil in the church dressing room, her joyful tears during our first dance, her warm congratulations when David and I had purchased our home. "You will always be family to us," she whispered fiercely in my ear. "No matter what happens next." Charles embraced me next, his usual heartiness subdued but present. "Whatever you need, Emma. Anytime." They left together, Charles's arm still protectively around Patricia's shoulders, neither of them acknowledging David as they passed. The door closing behind them seemed to mark a definitive end to the evening's charade of normalcy. Melissa approached me next, her earlier discomfort now replaced with evident remorse. "I should have told you what I suspected," she said, her voice thick with regret. "I convinced myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't have proof, that it might be nothing. I was a coward, and I failed you as a friend." "Yes, you did," I agreed, unable to offer false absolution. The hurt of her silence was still too raw, her complicity by omission too fresh. But I understand why. She nodded, accepting my response, without protest. "If you ever want to talk about any of this, I'm here, when you're ready." "I appreciate that," I said, though I wasn't sure if our friendship could survive this breach of trust. Time would tell. As Melissa and her husband prepared to leave, David finally rose from his seat at the table. He looked diminished somehow, his usual commanding presence replaced by uncertainty. "You've made your point, Emma," he said, keeping his voice low. "You've humiliated me in front of our families. Isn't that enough for tonight?" The audacity of his statement momentarily robbed me of speech. Even now, facing the wreckage of his own making, he was casting himself as the victim. "Humiliated you?" I repeated incredulously. "By what, exactly? Revealing the truth about your behavior? Allowing your actions to have consequences?" "This spectacle wasn't necessary," he insisted, gesturing around the dining room. "We could have handled this privately, like adults." "Like you've been handling your affair privately?" I countered. "Or perhaps you're referring to how you've been privately draining our investment account to fund your weekends with Vanessa." His head snapped up, surprise evident. "How did you know about the withdrawals?" "The same way I knew about everything." "Else, David," I looked. "Once I started paying attention, your deceptions were embarrassingly obvious." My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncertain whether to leave us to this confrontation or stay for my protection. Rachel made the decision for them, stepping forward to stand beside me. "I think you should leave now, David," she said firmly. "Emma has family here. She doesn't need you." David's gaze moved from Rachel to me, then to my parents. Whatever he saw in their expressions seemed to convince him that further discussion was futile. "Fine," he conceded, reaching for his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. "But this conversation isn't over, Emma. We'll need to discuss practical arrangements." "My lawyer will contact yours," I replied coolly. "Until then, I suggest you find somewhere else to stay." "This is my house, too," he protested, a flash of the old David, entitled and accustomed to getting his way, emerging through the facade of contrition. "A house purchased primarily with my inheritance from my grandmother," I reminded him. "As you'll recall from our financial disclosures to James Norton yesterday." The mention of specific legal steps already taken seemed to land with physical impact. David had clearly underestimated how thoroughly I had prepared during the past 48 hours. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he accused, his voice hardening. "Playing the wronged wife, turning everyone against me." "Don't," my father interrupted, stepping forward for the first time. "Don't you dare try to make Emma the villain in this story, son. You've done enough damage without adding that insult." David looked as if he might argue further, but something in my father's stance, protective, resolute, and unmistakably angry, seemed to give him pause. I'll get some things and go to a hotel, he said finally, the fight draining from him. We can sort out the rest later. As he moved toward the stairs, I found myself following him, propelled by a need to witness this transition, from our shared bedroom to his departure, rather than imagine it later. Emma, my mother called after me, concern evident in her voice. Let him go, stay with us. It's okay, I assured her, though nothing about the situation felt remotely okay. I'll be right back. Upstairs, David moved through our bedroom with practiced efficiency, pulling a suitcase from the closet and filling it with essentials. I stood in the doorway, watching as he selected clothes, toiletries, and personal items, methodically dismantling, his presence in the space we had shared for 8 years. The normalcy of his movements, the same way he packed for business trips, organized and strategic, struck me as surreal against the backdrop of the evening's revelations. How many times had I watched him pack like this, kissing him goodbye at the door, unaware that his destination wasn't always the client meeting or industry conference on his itinerary? I meant what I said downstairs, I said finally, breaking the loaded silence. I want you gone from this house until the divorce is finalized. David paused, a folded sweater in his hands, the charcoal cashmere I had given him last Christmas. And where exactly am I supposed to go? That's not my concern anymore, I replied, surprised by how liberating the words felt. For years, I had automatically assumed responsibility for David's comfort and convenience, anticipating his needs often before he expressed them. The realization that his well-being was no longer my priority felt both foreign and exhilarating. Perhaps Vanessa has room at her place, I suggested, unable to resist the petty jab. Or is that too soon in the relationship? Hard to gauge the appropriate timeline when everything's been based on lies. He zipped the suitcase with more force than necessary. I made mistakes, Emma, serious ones. But you're acting like our entire marriage was a sham. Wasn't it? I asked, genuinely curious about his perception. At what point did you decide that fidelity was optional? That honesty was negotiable? Was it a gradual erosion, or did you always plan to live by different rules than the ones you agreed to when we married? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. It wasn't like that. I loved you. I still love you in my way. In your way, I repeated, the phrase landing like a stone, which apparently includes lying to my face for years, exposing me to potential health risks with multiple partners, and using our joint resources to finance your affairs. That's not love, David. That's exploitation. He flinched visibly at the word. You make it sound so calculated. Wasn't it? The separate phone, the elaborate cover stories, the coordination with Melissa for package deliveries, none of that happened by accident. You made consistent, deliberate choices to deceive me. David sat heavily on the edge of the bed, our bed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For a moment, he looked genuinely remorseful, and I felt a dangerous flicker of the compassion that had been so integral to our relationship. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said quietly. The first time, with Claudia, it was just a weekend. A stupid mistake after a work conference when I'd had too much to drink. I promised myself it was a one-time lapse, that I'd rededicate myself to our marriage. But then there was a second time, I prompted when he fell silent. And a third. And Vanessa. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. Each time it was easier to justify. Each time the lies came more naturally. With Vanessa. He trailed off, seemingly unable to articulate whatever rationalization had sustained that particular deception. With Vanessa, you created an entirely fictional version of our marriage, I finished for him. You didn't just cheat. You rewrote our history to make your behavior acceptable to her. She wouldn't have continued seeing me if she thought I was happily married, he admitted, the honesty coming far too late to salvage anything. And were you? Happily married? The question escaped before I could reconsider it, revealing a vulnerability I had promised myself I wouldn't show. David looked up, something like genuine pain crossing his features. I thought I was, until I wasn't. And by then, it seemed easier to look elsewhere than to figure out what had changed between us. The simplicity of his explanation was both devastating and infuriating. He had discarded years of shared history, mutual support, and built trust, because it seemed easier than doing the work of addressing whatever dissatisfaction had crept into our relationship. "You never gave us a chance," I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "You never came to me with concerns or frustrations. You never suggested counseling or asked for changes. You just found replacements when aspects of our marriage didn't meet your expectations." "Would it have made a difference?" he asked, a hint of the old David, pragmatic, solutions-oriented, emerging. "If I had told you I was feeling restless or unfulfilled, would you have been open to working on things?" The question struck me as fundamentally unfair, asking me to validate his choices by suggesting that honest communication would have been futile. "You never gave me the opportunity to find out," I replied evenly. "You made unilateral decisions about our marriage without my knowledge or consent. And now, you want me to take partial responsibility for the outcome." He had the grace to look ashamed. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," I corrected him. "And it's consistent with everything you've done, shifting responsibility, minimizing your actions, recasting yourself as someone who had no better options." Rising from the bed, he grasped the handle of his suitcase, his knuckles white with tension. "So that's it? 8 years together, and you're ready to throw it all away without even considering reconciliation?" The audacity of the question almost made me laugh. "I'm not the one who threw our marriage away, David. You discarded it piece by piece, lie by lie, affair by affair. I'm just acknowledging what's already happened." He moved toward the door, pausing when he reached the threshold where I stood. For a moment, we were close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same scent I had given him for his birthday 3 years ago, chosen specifically to complement his natural scent. The familiar fragrance triggered a cascade of memories. His arms around me during slow dances at friends' weddings, his presence beside me at my grandmother's funeral, his body against mine in countless intimate moments that had once felt sacred and true. "I am sorry, Emma," he said softly, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine regret. "Not just for getting caught, but for the pain I've caused you. You deserved better." The simple acknowledgement, so long overdue, threatened to unravel the composure I had maintained throughout the evening. I stepped aside, allowing him to pass without further comment, afraid that if I opened my mouth to respond, all my carefully contained emotions would spill out in a torrent I couldn't control. I followed him downstairs where my parents, Rachel and Michael, waited in uncomfortable silence. No one spoke as David gathered his keys and wallet from the entry table. As he reached for the doorknob, he turned back, surveying the remnants of the anniversary celebration that had become the funeral for our marriage. "I'll have my lawyer contact James Norton tomorrow," he said, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. "We should be able to reach reasonable terms without extended litigation." "I hope so," I replied, though I had no intention of accepting, less than I was entitled to after his deceptions. "For everyone's sake." With a final nod that encompassed the room but focused on no one in particular, David left, the door closing behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. For several moments, no one moved or spoke. Then Rachel was beside me, her arm around my shoulders, supporting me as the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to ebb, leaving exhaustion and grief in its wake. "Let's clean this up tomorrow," she suggested gently, gesturing to the dining room where our untouched anniversary dinner still sat in elegant disarray. You need rest. The thought of my bed, our bed, where David had just packed his belongings made my stomach twist. I can't stay here tonight, I realized aloud. Of course not, my mother said, her practical nature asserting itself through her evident concern. You'll come home with us. We'll send Michael to get whatever you need for the next few days. The simplicity of their support, unwavering, unquestioning, and immediately actionable, broke something inside me. The tears I had been holding back all evening finally spilled over, hot tracks of grief down my cheeks. I didn't know, I gasped between sobs that seemed to come from some deep primal place. For years, I didn't know. How did I not see what was happening in my own marriage? My father enfolded me in his arms, his embrace solid and secure as it had been throughout my childhood. Because you trusted him, sweetheart. Because that's what good people do in marriages. They trust. I feel so stupid, I confessed, giving voice to the shame that had been lurking beneath my anger. Everyone probably knew except me, the last to find out about my own husband's affairs. No, Rachel said firmly, joining our parents in surrounding me with support. No one knew the extent of this, Emma. And even if some suspected, like Melissa, that doesn't make you stupid. It makes you a wife who believed in her marriage. Their reassurances helped, but couldn't entirely dispel the humiliation of realizing how successfully I had been deceived. For years, I had prided myself on my perceptiveness, my ability to read people and situations with clarity. Now, that self-image lay in ruins alongside my marriage. Let's get you home, my mother suggested, using tissues from her purse to gently wipe my tears. Everything looks different after sleep, even the worst situations. I doubted that a single night's rest would substantially change the devastation I felt, but I allowed them to guide me toward the door, too emotionally depleted to resist. Rachel gathered my purse and phone while Michael found my overnight bag. In the hall closet, the same bag I had packed just days ago when returning from my business trip, never imagining how completely my life would change in the interim. As we prepared to leave, the caterers emerged hesitantly from the kitchen, clearly uncertain about protocol in this unprecedented situation. Mrs. Mitchell, the head caterer began, her professional composure slightly strained. Would you like us to pack up the food before we go? The formal address, Mrs. Mitchell, hit me with unexpected force. Soon, I would no longer be Mrs. Anyone. The name I had taken 8 years ago, the identity I had built as David's wife and partner, would be shed like an outgrown garment. Yes, please, I managed, finding my practical side again. And the cake, in the refrigerator as well. Take whatever you and your staff would enjoy, and leave the rest. The anniversary cake, a replica of our wedding cake's top tier, which I had specially ordered as part of the evening's celebration, now seemed like a cruel joke. The thought of it sitting in our refrigerator, uneaten and unnecessary, was more than I could bear. As we stepped outside, the cool autumn air felt cleansing against my tear-streaked face. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights illuminating, well-maintained homes where other marriages continued in their usual rhythms, untouched by the seismic disruption that had just occurred in mine. In my parents' car, secured in the back seat like a child after a tantrum, I watched my house, our house recede in the window. The home I had lovingly decorated, where I had hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings, where I had believed I was building a lifelong partnership, now seemed like a stage set for a play that had abruptly closed. We'll figure all of this out, Rachel assured me, holding my hand tightly in hers. Not tonight, but soon. One step at a time. One step at a time. The phrase reminded me of hiking trips David and I had taken in the early years of our relationship. Challenging. Trails in New Hampshire and Vermont, where the only way to reach the summit was to focus on each footfall, each segment of the path. rather than the daunting distance ahead. This new journey, through betrayal, divorce, and eventual healing, would require the same approach. Each day, each decision, each emotion would need to be faced individually, without becoming overwhelmed by the totality of what lay ahead. As we drove through familiar streets toward my childhood home, I felt simultaneously ancient and infantile, aged beyond my years by disillusionment, yet reduced to a childlike dependency by shock and grief. The woman who had stood in her dining room an hour earlier, orchestrating her husband's public reckoning with calculated precision, now seemed like a different person entirely. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked quietly, my voice hoarse from crying. "Tomorrow you rest," my mother replied from the front seat, her tone brooking no argument. "The practical details can wait another day." But even as she spoke, my mind was already cataloging the tasks that would need to be addressed: changing passwords on accounts, documenting assets, contacting my office about an extended absence, deciding what to tell friends and colleagues about the sudden dissolution of my marriage. The pragmatic part of me, the part that had methodically gathered evidence and consulted with James Norton before the confrontation, was already reasserting itself, creating lists and action items as a defense against the emotional abyss that threatened to engulf me. By the time we reached my parents' home, the modest colonial where I had grown up, now meticulously maintained for their retirement years, I had mentally drafted a full agenda for the coming days. The planning felt like constructing a raft amid a shipwreck, something to cling to while the familiar structures of my life disintegrated around me. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. The faint scent of my mother's favorite candles, the comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than show, the framed family photos chronicling decades of shared history. Among them were several from my wedding day, images of David and me, radiant with happiness and certainty, surrounded by the same family members who had witnessed our marriage's implosion just hours ago. My mother followed my gaze to the photographs and moved quietly to turn them face down. The simple gesture of protection touched me deeply. "You should try to eat something," she suggested, heading toward the kitchen with determined practicality. "You've had nothing all evening." Food was the last thing I wanted, but I recognized the offering for what it was: my mother's love language, her way of providing tangible care when words seemed inadequate. "Just tea, maybe," I compromised, sinking onto the familiar living room sofa. Rachel sat beside me, her presence a comfort that required no conversation. We had always been this way, able to support each other through silence as effectively as through words. Now, she simply held my hand while my father built a small fire in the hearth, the routine domestic activity grounding me in the midst of emotional chaos. "He wasn't always like this," I said suddenly, surprising myself with the defense of David that emerged unbidden. "In the beginning, he was kind and thoughtful. He made me feel valued and seen." Rachel squeezed my hand but didn't contradict me. "I know. I remember." When did it change? I wondered aloud. When did I become someone he could lie to so easily? When did our vows become optional for him? There were no answers forthcoming. Of course. Only David could explain the evolution of his deceptions, and even his explanation earlier, that each betrayal had become easier to justify, offered little real insight into the man I had married and apparently never truly known. My mother returned with a tray bearing tea and simple sandwiches, setting it on the coffee table before joining us. "You'll drive yourself crazy with those questions, Emma," she said gently. "Some things we never fully understand, even when explanations are offered." She spoke from experience, I knew. My father's younger brother, my Uncle Robert, had abandoned his family decades earlier, disappearing without explanation, and resurfacing years later with a new wife and children in Arizona. The betrayal had affected my father deeply, though he rarely spoke of it. Your mother's right, my father confirmed, settling into his armchair across from us. Understanding the why matters less than figuring out the what next. The pragmatic approach resonated with me, offering a path forward through the morass of confusion and hurt. What next? Indeed. The question had a clarifying effect, redirecting my focus from the devastating past to the uncertain but navigable future. I woke the next morning in my childhood bedroom, momentarily disoriented by the familiar surroundings from a different phase of life. Sunlight filtered through the curtains my mother had never replaced, the same pale blue fabric that had hung there during my high school years. For a blissful few seconds, I existed in the liminal space between sleep and full consciousness, before memory crashed back with devastating clarity. The confrontation. David's face as his deceptions were exposed, Vanessa's confusion and eventual realization that she too had been manipulated, the aftermath of it all. Pulling myself upright, I noticed my phone on the nightstand, its notification light blinking insistently. I hesitated before reaching for it, bracing myself for whatever awaited. David's justifications, perhaps, or messages from friends who had somehow already heard about last night's disaster. Instead, I found an email from James Norton, sent at 6:30 that morning, requesting a meeting at his office at my earliest convenience. There was also a brief text from Rachel. Coming by at 10 with breakfast and moral support. Love you. The clock showed 8:45. I had slept far longer than expected, my body claiming the rest my mind had resisted. Downstairs, I found my mother, at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed what appeared to be financial documents. Good morning, sweetheart, she said, looking up with the careful smile of someone navigating an emotional minefield. There's coffee in the pot. What are you working on? I asked, pouring myself a mug of the strong black coffee my father had always preferred. She hesitated, then sighed. Just reviewing our accounts. Your father and I want to make sure we can help if you need it during everything that's coming. The gesture, practical and loving, brought fresh tears to my eyes. My parents had always lived comfortably but modestly, saving carefully for retirement after putting both Rachel and me through college without student loans. The thought of them rearranging their finances to support me touched me deeply. That's incredibly generous, I said, sitting across from her. But not necessary. I'll be okay financially. My confidence wasn't feigned. As an editor at Patterson Publishing, I earned a solid salary that could sustain me independently. The house would likely need to be sold in the divorce settlement, but my grandmother's inheritance, which had provided the substantial down payment, would ensure I received a fair portion. David's infidelity and financial deceptions would strengthen my position further, according to James Norton's initial assessment. I know you will, my mother agreed, but we want you to know the option is there. For anything you need. I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Thank you. Just having a place to stay for a few days is enough for now. She nodded, understanding that my need was more emotional than financial. Your father had to go into the office for a few hours, year-end reviews that couldn't be rescheduled. He didn't want to wake you, but he'll be back by lunch. The normalcy of my father's work routine was oddly comforting, a reminder that life continued its ordinary rhythms even as my personal world imploded. I took a long sip of coffee, relishing its bitterness and warmth. I need to meet with James today, I said, indicating my phone. He sent an email this morning. Of course, my mother replied. Your car is still at your house, but you can take mine. The thought of returning to the house so soon sent a wave of anxiety through me. Could you or Rachel possibly drive? Me? I'm not sure I'm ready to go back there yet. Rachel mentioned bringing breakfast at 10. We can go afterward. I'll drive you to James's office, and then perhaps we should collect some more of your things from the house. The practical itinerary helped anchor me in the present moment, giving structure to what otherwise felt like an endless expanse of uncertainty. "Has David tried to contact you?" my mother asked carefully after a moment of silence. I checked my phone again, scrolling through notifications. "Not yet, though I'm sure he will once the initial shock wears off." "And when he does?" she prompted gently. I considered the question seriously. How would I respond when David inevitably reached out with explanations, justifications, perhaps even pleas for reconciliation? "I'll direct him to James," I said finally. "At least for now. I can't trust myself to navigate those conversations without legal guidance." My mother nodded, approval evident in her expression. "That's wise. There will be time for personal closure later, if you want it. Right now, protecting yourself has to be the priority." Her understanding reinforced what I already knew but needed to hear, that maintaining boundaries with David wasn't cold or vindictive, but necessary self-preservation. Rachel arrived promptly at 10, bearing a bag from my favorite bakery and a cardboard tray of specialty coffees. Michael followed behind her, carrying a potted orchid with delicate purple blooms. "I know flowers are cliché for emotional support," he said, placing the plant on the kitchen counter. "But I remembered you mentioning once that orchids remind you of your resilience, how they look delicate but are actually incredibly strong." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, and the fact that Michael had remembered that casual comment from years ago, brought a genuine smile to my face, perhaps the first since discovering David's deception. "It's perfect," I assured him. "Thank you." As we ate the pastries Rachel had brought, she updated me on practical matters she had already set in motion, canceling the joint credit card I shared with David, scheduling appointments with a financial advisor who specialized in divorce proceedings, researching apartments in case I decided to move rather than maintain the house. "You've thought of everything," I marveled, grateful for her proactive support. "I made a list last night while I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "It helped me feel useful when I felt so useless." "You're not useless," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "You're keeping me functional right now." After breakfast, my mother and I drove to James Norton's office in downtown Oak Ridge. The familiar street seemed strange somehow, as if my changed circumstances had altered the physical landscape of my life as well. James greeted us warmly in the reception area of his elegant office suite, his professional demeanor tempered with genuine concern. "Emma," he said, clasping my hand in both of his, "how are you holding up?" "About as well as can be expected," I replied, appreciating his direct acknowledgement of the emotional aspect of my situation. "What's happening?" Once seated in his office, James didn't waste time with platitudes. "David's attorney, Martin Griswold, contacted me first thing this morning," he explained, opening a leather portfolio. "They're proposing an expedited settlement." The name was familiar. Martin Griswold was one of the most prominent divorce attorneys in the area, known for representing high-profile clients and securing favorable terms. "That was fast," I observed, uncertainty creeping in. "David must be worried." James nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "With good reason. The terms they're proposing suggest they're very motivated to resolve this quickly and quietly." He slid a document across the desk toward me. "This is their initial offer. I've highlighted the key points for your review." I scanned the pages, my mind automatically categorizing the provisions into acceptable, unacceptable, and negotiable. The financial terms were surprisingly generous. David would assume all debts associated with his unauthorized use of our joint assets, transfer his portion of our investment portfolio to me as compensation, and make no claim on the house. "This seems too good to be true," I said cautiously, looking up at James. "What's the catch?" "The non-disclosure agreement on page 4, he replied, gesturing for me to continue reading. "It's comprehensive and mutual, but given the circumstances, it primarily benefits David. The NDA would prohibit either party from publicly discussing the details of our divorce, specifically forbidding mention of infidelity, financial improprieties, or other personal misconduct. Violation would trigger substantial financial penalties. He wants to protect his reputation, I surmised, understanding immediately. David's career depended on trust and credibility, qualities that would be severely damaged if the details of his deceptions became public knowledge. Precisely, James confirmed, particularly given his position at Bradford and Associates. If his professional colleagues or clients learned about the systematic deception involved in his personal life. He didn't need to finish the thought. David's role at the marketing firm involved managing major client relationships and significant financial responsibilities. The revelation that he had maintained elaborate deceptions while misappropriating joint assets would raise serious concerns about his trustworthiness and ethical standards. "What do you advise?" I asked, trusting James's experience in these matters. "The financial terms are extremely favorable," he acknowledged, "more generous than we would likely secure through litigation, even with the evidence of misconduct. The question is whether the NDA restrictions are acceptable to you." My mother, who had been silent during the exchange, spoke up. "Would Emma still be able to discuss what happened with family and close friends?" James nodded. "The agreement specifies public disclosure. Private conversations with immediate family members and a limited circle of close friends would be permitted, provided those individuals also maintain confidentiality." I considered the implications carefully. The NDA would prevent me from publicly exposing David's behavior, something I had no particular desire to do anyway, but would secure financial terms that acknowledged the harm his actions had caused. It seemed on balance a reasonable trade-off. "I'm inclined to accept with some modifications to the language in Section 3 regarding personal property," I decided, pointing to a clause that seemed unnecessarily restrictive about items I might want to retain from our home. James made a note in his portfolio. "I'll draft counterproposals for those sections. In the meantime, have you given thought to your immediate living arrangements? The agreement would grant you exclusive use of the marital home until it's sold, but you mentioned yesterday that you weren't comfortable returning there." The question brought me back to the practical realities I needed to address. "I'll stay with my parents for a week or two while I look for an apartment," I replied. "I need to collect more clothes and personal items from the house, but I don't think I can live there with all the memories." "Understandable," James agreed. "When you do go to collect your belongings, I suggest having a third party present, a family member or friend, just as a precaution." The thought that such precautions were necessary with the man I had been married to for 8 years struck me with fresh pain. How quickly trust had been replaced by legal safeguards and witnessed interactions. After discussing a few additional details, James promised to contact me once he had heard back from Martin Griswold regarding our counterproposal. As we prepared to leave, he paused, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Emma, I've represented many clients in similar situations," he said, his voice gentler than it had been during our business discussion. "The legal and financial aspects can be resolved relatively quickly, especially when both parties are motivated to avoid protracted conflict. The emotional recovery takes longer and follows its own timeline. Be patient with yourself." The advice, offered with evident sincerity, touched me unexpectedly. "Thank you, James. I'll try to remember that." Outside, the autumn sunshine felt incongruously bright against my somber mood. My mother linked her arm through mine as we walked to her car, her presence a silent comfort. "What do you think?" she asked once we were driving away from the office. "I think David is frightened," I replied honestly. "Not just of financial consequences, but of social and professional ones. He's offering a generous settlement to buy my silence." "And you're okay with that arrangement?" I considered her question carefully before responding. I have no desire to publicly humiliate David, even after what he's done. The settlement acknowledges his wrongdoing in the way that matters most to him, financially, while allowing me to move forward with dignity and security. It seems like the cleanest resolution. My mother nodded, accepting my reasoning without judgment. What about going to the house? Do you feel up to that today? The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me, but I recognized the necessity of facing it sooner rather than later. Yes, I decided. I need more clothes for work. Next week and some personal items I'd rather not leave there. I'll be with you the whole time, she assured me, adjusting our route toward the home I had shared with David. As we approached the familiar street, my pulse quickened involuntarily. Would David be there? Had he returned after securing a hotel room last night? What would I find inside? Evidence of hasty packing, perhaps, or signs that Vanessa had been there in my absence. My questions were answered partially by the absence of David's car in the driveway. The house itself looked exactly as it had the night before, no external indication of the seismic shifts that had occurred within its walls. Using my key to enter felt strange, almost intrusive, as if I were visiting someone else's home rather than my own. Inside, the evidence of last night's aborted celebration remained. Dining room table still partially set, flower arrangements beginning to wilt, a single wine glass with my lipstick mark still on the rim. Let's tackle the bedroom first, my mother suggested practically. Then gather whatever else you need before dealing with any of this. She gestured to the dining room, understanding my reluctance to dismantle the physical remnants of the previous evening. Upstairs, the bedroom showed signs of David's hasty departure. Dresser drawers not fully closed, closet doors left ajar, the bathroom counter cleared of his toiletries. On his nightstand, his wedding ring sat in the small ceramic dish where he often placed it before showering, a detail that sent a sharp pain through my chest. He had removed it and left it behind, a gesture whose symbolism couldn't be clearer. I moved methodically through the room, selecting clothes for the coming weeks, gathering toiletries and personal items, carefully avoiding looking at the photographs of David and me that still adorned the dresser and walls. My mother found a suitcase in the storage closet and quietly helped pack, maintaining a respectful silence as I navigated this painful process. In my home office, I collected my laptop, important documents, and several books I was editing for work. The shared space contained fewer emotional triggers than the bedroom, making it easier to focus on the practical task at hand. As I was about to leave the office, a notification chimed on my phone, an email from someone named Andrea Collins with the subject line, "Regarding David Mitchell." I didn't recognize the name, and something about the timing sent a chill through me. "What is it?" my mother asked, noticing my expression. "An email about David from someone I don't know," I replied, hesitating before opening it. The message was brief and direct. "Ms. Jensen, we have never met, but I believe we have something significant in common. I recently discovered that my boyfriend of 5 months, David Mitchell, is married to you. If this information is accurate, I would appreciate a conversation at your convenience. I can be reached at this email or at the number below. Sincerely, Andrea Collins." I stared at the screen in disbelief, a strange numbness spreading through me. Another woman. Not Vanessa or Claudia, but someone else entirely. How many parallel lives had David been maintaining? How many women had he deceived alongside me? Wordlessly, I handed the phone to my mother, watching as her expression shifted from concern to shock to carefully controlled anger. "Oh, Emma," she said softly, returning the device. "I'm so sorry." The apology, for a situation neither of us could have prevented or anticipated, broke something inside me. I sank into my office chair, a harsh laugh escaping before I could suppress it. How many are there? I wondered aloud. How many women has he been lying to simultaneously? And how did she find me? My mother placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Social media, probably. Or perhaps she hired someone to investigate once she became suspicious. The explanation made logical sense, but did little to mitigate the fresh wave of humiliation washing over me. The revelation of Vanessa had been devastating enough. The possibility of multiple additional deceptions expanded the betrayal beyond what I had already begun processing. Should I respond? I asked, genuinely uncertain. Part of me wanted to ignore the message entirely, to shield myself from further pain. Another part recognized in Andrea a fellow victim who might be experiencing the same confusion and hurt I had felt days earlier. That's entirely your decision, my mother replied carefully. But remember that any communication could potentially impact your legal position. You might want to consult James before responding. Her advice was sound, reminding me to consider the broader implications rather than acting on emotional impulse. I forwarded the email to James with a brief note asking for his guidance, then set my phone aside, unwilling to dwell on this new complication. Let's finish here, I said, rising from the chair with fresh determination. I want to collect my things and go. We worked efficiently, gathering everything I would need for an extended absence from the house. As we carried the last of the bags downstairs, I paused in the living room, my gaze caught by the framed photographs on the mantel, a visual timeline of my relationship with David. There we were on our third date, hiking in the White Mountains, our relationship still new and filled with discovery. Next, our engagement photo, my left hand prominently displayed to showcase the solitaire diamond that had seemed to represent such certainty. Then our wedding day, surrounded by the same family members who had witnessed its destruction just hours ago. Anniversary trips, holiday celebrations, moments that had seemed meaningful and true at the time. Had any of it been real? Had David ever been the man I believed him to be, or had he always contained this capacity for calculated deception? The questions had no satisfactory answers, only the painful reality that the history captured in these photographs was, at minimum, incomplete, omitting the parallel narratives he had been crafting with other women. I reached for the wedding photo, removing it from its place of prominence. One by one, I gathered the framed images, stacking them carefully on the coffee table. I couldn't bear to destroy them. They were, after all, part of my history, however painful. But I couldn't leave them displayed like artifacts from a happier time, not when I now knew the happiness had been built on foundations of sand. We can store these at our house, my mother offered, understanding my intention without requiring explanation. Until you decide what to do with them. I nodded gratefully, wrapping the frames in a throw blanket from the couch to protect them during transport. The empty spaces they left behind on the mantel and side tables seemed to echo the hollowness I felt inside, visible reminders of absence and loss. As we prepared to leave, I took a final look around the home I had loved, where I had believed I was building a life of mutual respect and commitment. The beautiful spaces I had carefully decorated, the comfortable routines I had established, the future I had envisioned unfolding within these walls, all now irreparably altered by the knowledge of David's betrayal. Ready? My mother asked gently, car keys in hand. Not really, I admitted, but I need to go anyway. Outside, the November air had turned cooler, carrying the distinct scent of approaching winter. As we loaded the last of my belongings into my mother's car, a vehicle turned onto our street. A sleek black sedan I recognized immediately as David's company car. He slowed as he approached the house, clearly surprised to see us in the driveway. For a moment, I considered retreating, inside to avoid the confrontation. But something in me, perhaps pride, perhaps the need for this inevitable moment to simply be over, held me in place as he pulled into the driveway behind my mother's car. David emerged from the sedan looking considerably less composed than his usual polished self. His hair was unkempt, his face shadowed with stubble, his clothes wrinkled as if he'd slept in them. The visible evidence of his discomfort provided a small, petty satisfaction that I immediately felt guilty for experiencing. "Emma," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Just collecting some things," I replied, matching his tone. We were about to leave. My mother stepped closer to me, her presence both protective and grounding. David acknowledged her with a nod, but kept his focus on me. "Martin Griswold said he's been in touch with your attorney," he said. "Have you reviewed our proposal?" The shift to business matters, avoiding the emotional elephant between us, was so quintessentially David that I almost laughed. Even now, facing the wreckage of our marriage, he defaulted to pragmatic problem-solving rather than emotional reckoning. "Yes," I confirmed. "James is preparing a response with some requested modifications. You'll hear from him soon." David nodded, seemingly relieved by my business-like approach. "Good. That's good. I think we can resolve this amicably." Amicably. As if we were dissolving a business partnership rather than a marriage destroyed by his systematic deception. The word choice was revealing, another attempt to sanitize and normalize what had happened between us. "I received an interesting email today," I said suddenly, unable to maintain the pretense of cordial dissolution. "From Andrea Collins. Does that name sound familiar?" The color drained from David's face, his carefully constructed composure crumbling visibly. "Emma, I can explain—" "No," I interrupted, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "No more explanations. No more lies. Whatever you had with Andrea, or Vanessa, or Claudia, or anyone else I don't yet know about, is between you and them now. I'm done being an audience for your justifications." He looked stricken, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. For the first time since I'd known him, David Mitchell, always articulate, always prepared with a persuasive response, was utterly speechless. "The divorce settlement will address the practical matters," I continued, finding strength in the TUAA, clarity of my position. "Beyond that, we have nothing more to discuss." 8 years, he managed finally, his voice barely audible. 8 years together? And that's it? We're reduced to legal documents and property divisions? The audacity of his hurt was almost impressive. "That reduction began the first time you chose to lie to me," I replied evenly. "Each deception, each betrayal, each woman you involved in our marriage, those were your choices, David. I'm simply acknowledging what you've already done." My mother placed a gentle hand on my arm. "We should go, Emma. This conversation can wait for another time, with attorneys present." She was right, of course. Nothing productive could come from this unexpected confrontation, and I was already feeling the emotional toll of maintaining my composure. "James will be in touch about the settlement," I said, turning toward my mother's car. "Please direct any communication through him for now." "And us?" David asked, an unfamiliar vulnerability in his voice. "Is there any chance at all that we could eventually—" "No," I interrupted, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. "What we had is gone, David. You destroyed it systematically, deliberately, over years. There's no foundation left to rebuild on." The finality of my statement hung in the air between us, an invisible barrier more definitive than any physical distance. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed genuine remorse in his expression, not just regret at being caught, but true recognition of what had been lost through his actions. Then I turned away, unwilling to be drawn back into the emotional undertow of our relationship. Whatever David felt now, regret, loss, even genuine pain, was the natural consequence of choices he had made with full awareness of potential outcomes. My responsibility for managing his emotions had ended the moment I discovered his betrayal. As my mother's car pulled away from the house, I watched David's figure growing smaller in the side mirror. He remained in the driveway, a solitary silhouette, against the home we had once shared. looking somehow diminished without the confident persona he had maintained throughout our marriage. The image stayed with me, not with vindictive satisfaction, but with a strange, hollow acceptance. This was the reality behind the carefully constructed facade. "You did well back there," my mother said as we turned onto the main road. Setting boundaries without cruelty. Her approval meant more than I could express. Throughout my childhood, my mother had modeled quiet strength, never harsh or vindictive, but unwavering in her self-respect. Now I found myself drawing on her example, searching for dignity in a situation designed to strip it away. "It feels unnatural," I admitted. Part of me still wants to comfort him, to ease his distress. "Isn't that absurd? After everything he's done?" "Not absurd," she countered gently. "It's the habit of love, Emma. For 8 years, his well-being was intertwined with yours. Those patterns don't disappear overnight, even when trust is broken." The observation was both comforting and painful, acknowledging that my instinct toward compassion wasn't weakness, but also reminding me of the genuine care I had invested in a relationship that had proved fundamentally unequal. While I had been constructing a life of mutual support and transparency, David had been creating elaborate deceptions, compartmentalizing his various relationships with clinical precision. Back at my parents' house, I found Rachel waiting, her laptop open, on the kitchen table. "Perfect timing," she said, turning the screen toward me. "I've been researching apartments near your office. There are several promising options available for immediate move-in." Her practical approach to my situation, focusing on concrete next steps rather than dwelling on painful emotions, was exactly what I needed. For the next hour, we reviewed rental listings, comparing amenities, locations, and lease terms. The activity provided welcome distraction from thoughts of David, Andrea Collins, and the dissolution of my marriage. "This one has potential," Rachel suggested, pointing to a modern one-bedroom in a renovated historic building downtown. "Walking distance to Patterson Publishing, secure entry system, and the photos show excellent natural light for your plants." The thought of my extensive houseplant collection, still residing in the marital home, reminded me of another loss in this separation. The jade plant I had nurtured since graduate school, the fiddle-leaf fig David had given me for our 3rd anniversary, the orchids that had flourished under my careful attention, all part of a home I could no longer inhabit. "We'll get your plants," Rachel assured me, reading my expression with the intuition of a lifetime's connection. "Michael and I can go back for them when David's at work." Her certainty that these details could be managed, these fragments of my previous life salvaged and transplanted, provided strange comfort. Perhaps this was the way forward, not through grand gestures of independence or dramatic reinvention, but through the patient reconstruction of daily life, one element at a time. My phone chimed with a notification, an email from James Norton with the subject line, "Settlement Update." I excused myself to the guest room to read it privately, away from the concerned gazes of my mother and sister. James's message was concise and professional. Martin Griswold had responded positively to our counter-proposals regarding personal property. The revised agreement now explicitly listed items I would retain from the marital home, including my grandmother's antique secretary desk, my personal library, and all artwork I had acquired before the marriage or purchased with my separate funds. The financial terms remained generous, with David assuming all marital debts and transferring additional investment assets as compensation for his misuse of joint resources. Most significantly, the non-disclosure agreement had been modified to explicitly permit communication with Andrea Collins or any other women who approached me regarding relationships with David, provided such communications remained private. This concession surprised me. Either David genuinely recognized these women deserved some explanation, or he feared that preventing such conversations might provoke more public disclosures. James recommended accepting the revised terms, noting that they exceeded what we would likely achieve through contested proceedings. He had attached the updated documents for my review, requesting my decision by the following afternoon so we could move forward with finalizing the settlement. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the clinical legal language that would dismantle my marriage and distribute its remains. There was something surreal about seeing our relationship reduced to assets, liabilities, and mutual releases of claims, the emotional investment of 8 years translated into financial equations and property inventories. Yet the settlement also represented a kind of justice, acknowledgement in the language David understood most intimately: money and reputation. By accepting financial responsibility for his deceptions and agreeing to substantial asset transfers, he was conceding the wrong he had done, regardless of whether he could verbalize genuine remorse. I forwarded the documents to my personal email to review more thoroughly later, then rejoined Rachel and my mother in the kitchen. They looked up, expectantly, but respected my brief headshake indicating I wasn't ready to discuss the details. "I made lunch," my mother announced, gesturing to sandwiches arranged on plates beside a colorful salad. "You need to eat, regardless of whatever legal matters are pending." The simple normalcy of the meal, seated at my parents' kitchen table, sharing food and measured conversation about topics carefully selected to avoid mention of David or divorce, provided unexpected emotional ballast. This was family in its most essential form: present, supportive, and undemanding in the face of crisis. After lunch, my father returned from his office, bringing with him a practical energy that further grounded the household. He mentioned driving by a storage facility near their home that offered month-to-month rentals, suggesting it might be useful for items I wanted to keep but couldn't accommodate in a temporary apartment. "I've also spoken with Ben at the bank," he added, referring to his longtime friend who managed the local branch where I had maintained accounts since college. "He's added extra security protocols to your personal accounts, just as a precaution." The measures were probably unnecessary given David's generous settlement offer and apparent desire to resolve matters quickly. Yet the additional protection comforted me, another layer of separation between my past vulnerability and future security. As afternoon faded into evening, I found myself drawn to the small sunroom at the back of my parents' house, a space that had always served as my refuge. During visits home, the November sunset cast long shadows across the garden, bare branches silhouetted against a sky streaked with fading orange and deepening blue. The scene matched my internal landscape, not the acute pain of fresh discovery, but a more subdued melancholy, tinged with threads of emerging possibility. Rachel found me there an hour later, offering a mug of tea as she settled into the wicker chair beside mine. "What are you thinking?" she asked after several minutes of companionable silence. "That I don't know who I am without him," I admitted, the truth emerging before I could censor it. "For 10 years, I've been part of Emma and David. Now I'm just Emma. And I'm not entirely sure what that means anymore." Rachel considered this, her expression thoughtful rather than pitying. "You were Emma before him," she reminded me gently. "A whole, complete person with dreams and strengths and peculiarities. Those didn't disappear when you married David. They just became interwoven with his." "But I've changed," I countered. The Emma who existed before David was 24, just finishing graduate school, with no real understanding of adult relationships or commitments. "Of course you've changed," Rachel agreed. "We all do. But those changes, the growth, the wisdom, the resilience you've developed, those belong to you, not to your marriage. You get to keep them, even as the relationship ends." Her perspective shifted something in my understanding. A recognition that while David had taken many things from me through his deception, he couldn't take who I had become. The strength I had developed, the professional accomplishments I had achieved, the friendships I had nurtured, these remained mine, regardless of the marriage's dissolution. Besides, Rachel added with the hint of a smile, if you're questioning who you are without David, imagine how much more he's questioning who he is without you. Your marriage may have been built partly on illusion, but at least the person you presented was real. His entire identity was constructed on elaborate lies. The observation wasn't meant to be comforting, exactly, but it contained a truth I hadn't fully articulated. David's deceptions had required compartmentalization and performance that would have been exhausting to maintain. His life had been a constant juggling act, managing multiple relationships, creating plausible cover stories, tracking his lies to ensure consistency. The man I had loved didn't really exist, but neither did the man Vanessa or Andrea thought. They knew. In a strange way, I had more solid ground to stand on than David did, despite being the one betrayed. I knew who I was. Wounded, certainly, but fundamentally honest in my dealings with others. David's sense of self was fractured across multiple fabricated narratives, none of them entirely true. That night, alone in the quiet guest room, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not the shocked tears of discovery or the angry tears of confrontation, but deeper, more reflective tears of mourning. I grieved not only for the marriage I had lost, but for the future I had imagined. The children we had discussed having someday, the retirement travels we had casually planned, the comforting vision of growing old together that had seemed so certain. The grief felt cleansing, necessary, acknowledging the death of a dream before I could begin creating new ones. Sometime near dawn, exhausted from emotion, I finally slept. Monday morning brought a return to practical realities. I emailed my supervisor at Patterson Publishing, requesting a week of personal leave to address unforeseen family circumstances. His response came quickly, concerned, accommodating, and blessedly free of probing questions. The luxury of privacy, of managing my personal crisis without workplace scrutiny, was another privilege I recognized with newfound appreciation. Over breakfast, I informed my parents and Rachel of my decision to accept James Norton's recommended settlement terms. "Are you sure?" my father asked, his protective instincts evident. "There's no rush to finalize anything." "I'm sure," I confirmed. "The terms are more than fair financially, and dragging out the legal process won't change the essential facts. I want this chapter closed so I can begin the next one." After breakfast, I called James to communicate my decision. His approval was evident, though professionally restrained. "I'll inform Martin Griswold immediately," he assured me. "Given the motivation on both sides, we should be able to finalize the documents by the end of the week. David will need to arrange the asset transfers, which might take a few more days for the investment accounts." "And after everything is signed?" I asked, uncertain about the procedural aspects of divorce despite my research. "We'll file the settlement agreement with the court along with the divorce petition," James explained. "Given the circumstances and the fact that both parties are in complete agreement on terms, the court should process it relatively quickly. I'd estimate you'll be legally divorced within 60 to 90 days. The timeline was both longer and shorter than I had expected, months before the legal dissolution would be complete, yet a remarkably accelerated process compared to many divorces. The remaining connection to David, even if only through legal proceedings, felt like a tenuous thread I was eager to sever. After ending the call with James, I turned my attention to another pending matter. Andrea Collins. Her email still awaited. Response: the decision complicated by competing impulses. Self-protection versus solidarity with another woman who had been deceived. After careful consideration, I composed a brief, factual reply. Ms. Collins, yes, I am married to David Mitchell. We are currently in divorce proceedings following my recent discovery of his infidelity with multiple partners. I'm willing to speak with you by phone if that would be helpful to you, though I may be limited in what I can discuss due to legal agreements. Sincerely, Emma Jensen. The response felt appropriately measured, acknowledging her situation without oversharing details. Of mine, offering support without promising more than I could provide. Whether Andrea would choose to continue the conversation remained to be seen, but I had extended the hand I wished someone had offered me when I first began to suspect David's deceptions. Later that morning, Rachel and I visited the apartment she had identified near Patterson Publishing. The building manager, responding to the urgency in our request, agreed to show the unit immediately. The space was smaller than I was accustomed to, but thoughtfully designed, with large windows overlooking a tree-lined street and built-in bookshelves that could accommodate at least part of my library. "It's available now?" I confirmed, already, mentally arranging my belongings in the neutral space. "The previous tenant moved out last week," the manager explained. "We've completed the standard cleaning and maintenance. It could be ready for move-in by Wednesday if you're interested." "I am," I said, surprising myself with the quickness of my decision. Very interested. The practical arrangements occupied the remainder of the day, completing the rental application, approved on the spot given my credit score and income verification, arranging for utilities to be connected, and writing a check for the security deposit and first month's rent. Each step, though mundane, felt significant. Deliberate movement toward independence rather than reactive flight from pain. That evening, as we celebrated the new apartment with takeout Chinese food at my parents' house, my phone displayed a call from an unfamiliar number. Excusing myself from the table, I answered with cautious curiosity. "Emma Jensen?" a female voice asked, hesitant but determined. "Yes, speaking." "This is Andrea Collins. I received your email earlier. Is this a good time to talk?" I moved to the sunroom for privacy, settling into the wicker chair as dusk gathered outside the windows. "Yes, now is fine. Thank you for calling." "I'm not sure where to begin," Andrea admitted, her voice suggesting she was close to my age, perhaps slightly younger. "This situation is so surreal." "I understand," I assured her, remembering my own disorientation upon discovering David's deceptions. "It might help if you tell me how you met David and what he told you about his personal situation." For the next 30 minutes, Andrea shared her story, meeting David at a charity event 8 months earlier, his pursuit of her through thoughtful gestures and apparent emotional availability, his explanation that he was recently divorced and ready for a fresh start. Their relationship had progressed steadily, with David integrating her into parts of his life while keeping other aspects mysteriously compartmentalized. "He never brought me to your house," she said, answering my unasked question. "Always his apartment downtown or my place. He said the house was part of the divorce settlement and too painful to visit. The downtown apartment was news to me. Another piece of David's elaborate parallel life that he had maintained with careful separation from our marital home. I wondered vaguely how he had afforded it, then remembered the unexplained withdrawals from our investment account that James had documented. "When did you begin to suspect something wasn't right?" I asked, curious about what had ultimately led her to investigate. "Last month," Andrea replied. "He had to cancel plans at the last minute, claimed a work emergency. But later that same evening, a friend saw him at a restaurant with another woman. Not you," she added quickly. "Someone my friend described as tall with auburn hair. Vanessa, almost certainly." The realization that David had been actively maintaining at least 3 simultaneous relationships with me, Andrea, and Vanessa was staggering in its audacity. The logistical complexity alone would have required constant vigilance and planning, to say nothing of the emotional compartmentalization involved. "I considered confronting him immediately," Andrea continued, "but something held me back. I started paying closer attention to inconsistencies in his stories. When he mentioned attending a college friend's wedding next month in California, I offered to accompany him. He had a dozen reasons why that wouldn't work, none of them particularly convincing. Her investigative approach sounded familiar. The same growing awareness of discrepancies, the same reluctance to trust instincts that contradicted the relationship's established narrative. I had gone through similar stages before discovering David's second phone, though my process had been compressed into days rather than weeks. After that, I hired someone, Andrea admitted, a note of embarrassment in her voice. A private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed to know if I was imagining things. You weren't, I confirmed gently. No. Within 2 days, the investigator had photographed David with the auburn-haired woman and confirmed his marriage to you. He located property records, social media posts from mutual friends, even your wedding announcement in the local paper 8 years ago. She paused, then asked the question that clearly troubled her most. Did you know about me? Or her? No, I assured her. I discovered everything just a few days ago when I found a second phone he had been using to communicate with Vanessa, the woman with auburn hair. I had no idea about you until your email yesterday. A sound that might have been relief or renewed pain came across the line. I've been asking myself how I could have been so naive, Andrea said after a moment. I'm normally perceptive about people, cautious even. But with David, he's exceptionally convincing, I finished for her, offering the perspective of someone who had been deceived far longer and more comprehensively. It's not naivety, Andrea. It's trust, which is supposed to be the foundation of intimate relationships. David manipulated that normal, healthy human capacity for his own purposes. The distinction seemed important, not just for Andrea, but for my own healing process. Reframing my experience not as a failure of judgment, but as the exploitation of a virtue helped shift the internal narrative away from self-blame. What happens now? Andrea asked, echoing the question that had occupied my thoughts since discovery. For me, divorce, I replied simply. The settlement agreement should be finalized this week. Beyond that, I trailed off, the future still, too nebulous to articulate clearly. I ended things with David yesterday, Andrea shared, before contacting you. He denied everything at first, then tried to explain it as a complicated situation where he was trying to do the right thing for everyone involved. The justification was so quintessentially David, reframing his deceptions as noble efforts to manage complex circumstances, that I might have laughed if the situation weren't so painful. Did he mention Vanessa? I asked, curious about which compartments of his life were collapsing into each other now that his deceptions had been exposed. No, Andrea answered. When I mentioned the other woman my friend had seen him with, he claimed she was a colleague. Even facing direct evidence, he was still trying to maintain the separate narratives. The conversation continued for several more minutes, both of us finding unexpected comfort in sharing perspectives on our parallel experiences with David. When we finally said goodbye, Andrea thanked me for my willingness to speak with her. It helps, she said simply, knowing I'm not the only one, that it wasn't something lacking in me that made this happen. It wasn't, I confirmed with certainty that extended to my own situation as well. This was about David's choices, not our worthiness. After ending the call, I remained in the sunroom, watching as darkness settled completely over the garden. The conversation with Andrea had shifted something in my understanding of what had happened, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Hearing her experience, so similar to mine, despite the different circumstances, reinforced the systematic nature of David's deceptions. This wasn't about relationship problems or unmet needs. It was about a pattern of behavior that predated any specific partner. The realization didn't diminish the pain of betrayal, but it did reframe it in a way that felt less personally devastating. David's actions reflected his character, not my value or adequacy as a partner. By Wednesday, the whirlwind of practical arrangements had produced tangible results. The new apartment was ready for occupancy, basic furniture had been delivered, a bed, sofa, and dining table purchased with unexpected decisiveness, and the settlement agreement had been signed by both David and me, witnessed and notarized under James Norton's supervision. Michael and Rachel had retrieved my plants from the marital home, along with additional personal belongings David had agreed I could collect before the house was prepared for sale. The items now filled my parents' garage, awaiting transfer to either the apartment or storage unit my father had secured. Standing in the empty apartment that afternoon, surrounded by boxes and the familiar greenery of my rescued plants, I experienced a curious mixture of emotions. Grief for what had been lost, anxiety about the unfamiliar path ahead, but also unmistakable threads of liberation and possibility. This space, unlike any I had inhabited before, was solely mine. Each decision about its arrangement, from furniture placement to wall color, would reflect only my preferences. After years of compromise and accommodation, some joyful, some reluctant, all part of the marital dance, the freedom to create an environment that answered only to my needs felt simultaneously daunting and exhilarating. As I positioned my grandmother's secretary desk beneath the living room window, my phone chimed with a text notification. I expected Rachel, who was bringing dinner to celebrate my first night in the new place, but instead found a message from David, the first direct communication since our confrontation in the driveway days earlier. The settlement is signed. I hope it provides some measure of closure. I know words are inadequate, but I am truly sorry for the pain I've caused. If you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here. The message was quintessentially David, acknowledgement of wrongdoing without specific accountability, an offer of continued connection that centered his availability rather than my needs. Even in apology, he remained focused on managing impressions rather than demonstrating genuine understanding of the harm he had caused. I considered responding, then decided against it. The settlement agreement provided the only closure I needed from David. Emotional reconciliation, if it ever came, would emerge from my own healing process rather than from any conversation with him. Setting the phone aside, I returned to arranging my plants, finding unexpected satisfaction in positioning each one where it would receive optimal light. The jade plant that had accompanied me through graduate school, multiple apartments, and, finally, the marital home now claimed a place of honor on the windowsill, its resilient nature a quiet reminder of continuity amid change. Rachel arrived an hour later, bearing dinner from my favorite Italian restaurant and a bottle of champagne. "For new beginnings," she explained, producing 2 glasses from her tote bag. As we ate at my new dining table, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the comforting presence of my plants, Rachel raised her glass in toast. "To Emma Jensen," she said simply, "who is stronger than she knows and braver than she believes." The name, my maiden name, legally reclaimed through the divorce settlement, felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like returning to a hometown after years away. Emma Jensen had existed before David Mitchell, and would continue long after the pain of his betrayal had faded into background memory. "To new beginnings," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. "And to the stories we haven't written yet." 3 months later, on a crisp February morning, I received the final divorce decree in the mail. A surprisingly simple document that officially dissolved what had once seemed an unbreakable bond. The envelope sat unopened on my kitchen counter for several hours while I completed an editing project, its presence both weighty and oddly anticlimactic, given the emotional processing that had already occurred. When I finally opened it, scanning the formal language that declared my marriage legally ended, I expected a fresh wave of grief, or perhaps anger. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of completion, the closing of a significant chapter rather than the devastating loss it would have represented months earlier. Later that evening, bundled against the winter cold, I walked to a small restaurant near my apartment where Catherine, my oldest friend, was waiting to mark the occasion with dinner. "How does it feel?" she asked as I settled across from her, unwinding my scarf. "Being officially divorced." I considered the question carefully, wanting to honor both the pain of the experience and the growth it had prompted. Like I've survived something I never expected to face, I answered honestly, and discovered I'm more resilient than I realized. Catherine nodded, understanding in her eyes. You know what impresses me most? Not just that you survived, but how you handled it, with dignity and strength without becoming bitter. Her observation touched me deeply. In the darkest moments following discovery, I had feared that David's betrayal would fundamentally change me, make me cynical, distrustful, permanently damaged in my capacity for connection. That I had navigated the experience without losing. My essential nature felt like its own form of victory. I'm not saying I'll be ready to trust easily anytime soon, I clarified, acknowledging the protective caution that remained. But I refused to let David's choices determine how I approach the rest of my life. Well said, Catherine approved, raising her wine glass. To the rest of your life, then, however you choose to live it. As our glasses clinked, I felt a sense of genuine optimism that had been absent in those first devastating days and weeks. The future stretched before me, not as a fearful unknown, but as an open landscape of possibility. What that landscape would eventually contain, perhaps new relationships, certainly continued professional growth, definitely deeper friendships, remained to be discovered. For now, it was enough to be here, present, and whole, authoring the next chapters of my story with hard-won wisdom and renewed appreciation for my own capacity to heal. David's betrayal had revealed painful truths about the marriage I thought I understood. But it had also revealed something equally important about myself, a core of resilience that remained unbroken even when everything around it shattered. That discovery, painful as its genesis had been, would inform every step of the journey ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out!